HR leaders, what's on your mind these days? Is it AI? Is it the economy? The talent market? Remote work? Retention? DEI? Pay transparency? New laws? Our 2024 Workplace Trends Report outlines how HR leaders are thinking about these challenges and what they believe will help their organizations overcome them. Want to find out what they said? Head on over to peoplemanagingpeople.com/Workplace Trends 2024 and download the report to find out.
Momentum's not motivation. And it's useful to draw a delineation there in that motivation is narrow. Motivation is just one part of momentum. Motivation is all about, well, how do we get someone to do something for us? How do we motivate them to do something for us? And so it's very narrow. Momentum is broader. It's really judging how our teams are, where they are.
Welcome to the People Managing People podcast. We're on a mission to build a better world of work and to help you build happy, productive workplaces. I'm your host, Tim Reitzma, and today on the show, Brendon Baker, author of a great book called Valuable Change, we will dig into the question, how do we create hope and energy within our teams and organizations? We dive deep into an idea called the momentum path that enables you to diagnose the current momentum level of each team member of your team, and then provides you a clear strategy on what to put in place to build and continue to grow. Hey, Brendon, welcome to the People Managing People podcast. It's so good to have you here. And we're going to get into your book here in a few minutes, Valuable Change. Again, I'm going to make a plug throughout this whole podcast as anybody who's listening should go and pick up this book because it just breaks down leadership and change and projects in such a brilliant way. But welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, before we get into it, why don't you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, a little bit about what you're up to, where you are, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. I'm Brendon Baker. I've started the Valuable Change Co. And what I'm obsessed with is helping change leaders drive real value. And it's been something that I've basically worn every hat in the change arena. My entire career has been change, from project management to leading it to supporting it to kind of any hat you can think of. I've done it. What had the mistakes. And learned from that, and through that, I've still managed to forge value in some of the most complex of situations. And one of the recurring themes there was it's the strength of the change leadership that makes the difference. And so that's what I'm obsessed with, is helping those change leaders drive real value. But I do admit, on my way, I found a secondary mission, and that secondary mission really is helping fight unnecessary complexity, because we all have this tendency to overcomplicate things. We run on the assumption, we kind of forget Occam's razor, right? The simplest answer is usually the correct one. We run on the assumption that if it's more complex, then that's probably it. Let's go do that. If it's not a 15-part process, we're not interested. And so helping reintroduce some of that simplicity into people's lives.
I've got so many questions just based on your intro already, and as we were saying in the kind of pre-show prep, that I go way off script often, so I already know where I'm going to go with this. But I do have a couple questions, kind of standard questions that I've introduced into the podcast. And the first one is, what does it mean to be a leader?
I'm going to take a little bit of artistic license here. And I'm going to reposition your question a little bit, and I'm going to interpret that as, what does it mean to be a change leader?
I love it.
Now, a change leader is someone who drives holistically, and holistically through the change, and that's without getting caught in the depths of the what are we doing, and that's without getting caught in the depths of all of the stakeholders and everything else. It's the ability to drive holistically, and in particular, they're doing four things well. They're creating a strong, clear change core. They are generating and protecting change momentum. They're creating what I call an 80-20 change platform to make it easier for everyone to run. And then finally, they're leveraging that strategic influence. And those fall they fall within what I call the 3 ripples of change leadership. Now, I call them ripples on purpose, and because I've noticed that change leadership ripples out. And so you need to get that core right, and it ripples through to inside your team, and it ripples through to outside your team, and even all the way through to your clients and customers. There is that human ripple effect. And to illustrate this, I'll ask you a question, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your experience, your latest experience when you your latest eating out experience. Have you recently been to a restaurant or anything similar?
Yeah, my wife and I had an amazing date on New Year's Eve, and so we're pushing out this podcast probably months after that. So we've gone on a few dates since then, but yeah, we had an amazing experience.
Brilliant. Now, let me ask you this: if your server, actually, I'm assuming that because it was an amazing experience, that the wait staff were all very, they met your needs, they were very supportive and attentive. Correct?
Absolutely, yes.
So let me ask you, if your wait staff had been sarcastic, rude, and given off that whole impression of just not wanting to be there, would your experience have been as positive?
Oh, absolutely not. The food could have been phenomenal, but we would second guess going back. Absolutely.
Exactly. And that's a very simple illustration of that ripple effect, where that wait staff may be having a bad day. And so they're just so they end up taking it out on the customers, and the customers then have that negative experience. And what's interesting is that it may not have been the wait staff that was having the bad day. It may have been the restaurant manager that was having the bad day, who took it out on the wait staff, who then took them out on the customers, and it ripples through. It's a simple illustration, but what's scary is that I've seen that exact thing play out on a several $100 million change.
Wow.
The leadership was shaky. The leadership were unstable. The core was unstable. It flowed through into the change teams. They were unstable. They were caught in the depths of despair. Their momentum was low, and it flowed through ultimately to all of their external stakeholders, and the change fell over.
Yeah, it's an expensive mistake. That actually reminds me of a story, a change story that I went through many years ago in my career. I was part of an integration team, part of a company that was acquired, and the change team that came in, was taking a look at all of our systems and processes. And I'll never forget this. One of the leaders came in and said, "Tim, you've built an amazing system here for your team, amazing processes, but we're going to throw it out, and you're going to do it my way." And that was it. And just like your illustration, do you think, how do you think I reacted? Was it just, oh, great. Okay. Sounds good. Or was it, all right, here we go. We're going at it.
That's exactly it. Yes. So I guess coming back to that question, change leadership is that ability to drive holistically, is to have those ripples in mind and keep the change rolling forward through multiple avenues.
Yeah, it reminds me also of just another podcast guest who was talking about leadership as an energy. And when you say ripples, I just see it as that energy, where if I woke up today and was in a terrible mood, had to sync up with my team and portrayed that energy onto my team, and now they're going to go and talk to other stakeholders, internal or external, and just there's ripples that have an effect across the organization, whether we think so or not. But I like how you said that, and I like that visual, like how it has that massive ripple effect. Whether you're in change or as a leader, we're change leaders all the time. We change directions, we change KPIs, we change metrics and strategies all the time. But the next question that I have, it kind of ties to this, and I think I'm going to kind of foresee where you're going to go with this. But when we think about build a better world of work, here at People Managing People, we're on mission to build a better world of work. And one question that we're wrestling with and we're asking ourselves is, when you hear that, what comes to mind? What does it mean to build a better world of work?
It's funny. So what comes to mind for me here is creating what I call an 80-20 platform. And there is, if it's okay with you, I'd like to tell a little bit of a story that really illustrates the point here. It's the story, it's called The Impossible Victory. And it's the story of an Italian man who single-handedly defeated the Nazis in 1935. So his name was Tazio Nivellari. He was an Italian Grand Prix driver, and it's the 1935 German Grand Prix. Now, the German Grand Prix was designed by the Third Reich at the time to prove that the Germans were the best in the world. It was set up to demonstrate that. The intention for the German Grand Prix was that a German driver in a German car would win the German Grand Prix. And to help make sure that happened, the Third Reich had essentially given the German teams, Audio Union and Mercedes, a ton of cash. A whole ton of cash to make better cars. And their cars were faster, more powerful. They cornered better. The suspension systems were better. Their cars were miles ahead. And then you had Tazio Nivellari, who was driving an Italian driver in an Italian car. He was in a 3-year-old Alfa Romeo. To say that he was outclassed would be an understatement. And so race day arrives. It's drizzly. The track is wet. And Tazio did actually, he put up some good times in terms of the qualifying. So he starts fairly close to the top of the pack. Bang, the race starts, and he has a terrible start. Gets left in the dust. The Germans all take off. But he has a trick up his sleeve. He's pioneering a new technique. It's four-wheel drifting. And so he starts four-wheel drifting around some of these corners. Now, to give you a little bit of context in terms of what they're driving here, they're driving basically glorified go-karts in 1935 that have an engine strapped to them that are more powerful than a modern VW. They are, and like no ABS, not even seatbelts. These guys are just living on the edge, right? Anyway, so he's four-wheel drifting, and using that on the wet track, he regains the lead, and he holds that until for about half the race, until it's time to pit. The Germans all come in and out, about a minute. Tazio pulls in, and his fuel pump fails, and so they're scrambling. His pit team is scrambling, trying to put the bottles and jugs and everything else they can to try to put fuel in his car, eventually get it full, and he's off on his way. But he's lost many significant minutes there. The race looks all but done for him at that point. But he comes out and he drives like a man absolutely possessed. And he takes one, and so he goes 8th, 7th, 6th, 5th, and he battles his way all the way up until it's the final lap, and he's sitting in second, and he is edging at the German car that's currently in the lead. And he is pushing him. And the thing is, no one expected Tazio to do this. And so that German was actually planning on pitting earlier that and putting new tires on. But he didn't, because had he done that, he would have given up the lead. So he was pushing his tires until that last lap, and the tires pop. Off he goes to the side. Tazio takes the lead. And there it is, an Italian driver in an Italian car winning the German Grand Prix. The crowd loved it. The Third Reich didn't. Awesome story, right? Mm-hmm. Classic underdog story. But if we look at that top 10, we have number 1, Tazio and his Alfa Romeo. But let's put aside the romanticism. We then have positions 2 to 9, Mercedes and Auto Union. So the two German manufacturers. They hold positions 2 to 9. Number 10 there is a Maserati. All right, so we've got 8 out of the 10 there being held by the drivers who had the better car. And so the question there is, are we building companies based on freak unique talent like Tazio? Or are we actually building companies embedding that human-led style thinking in terms of creating a platform for the 80%, creating a company that embeds learning, creating a company that embeds the right way of human-led capability improvement and momentum? That for me, that's the future for the world of work, is embedding a lot of these human aspects to allow the 80% to drive faster. And what I really like, and the kicker for this story, is that even Tadzio Nuvolari, he knew the answer to that question too. He had applied that season. He had applied to join the German auto union team, but had been declined.
Wow, that's a great story. It's an inspirational story for not just the underdog, but how can we apply that in the future of work, and how do we use that story to inspire building a better world of work? And yeah, when we look around our organizations, there's so much talent, and are we allowing space for that talent to thrive, to grow? Are we creating learning opportunities? Are we creating that momentum? And not just with the top performers, because top performers might be the most vocal people in the organization. And I've come across that in my journey, is not often, or it's not always the fact that a top performer is the most vocal. Could be that underdog, somebody who is just silently working away with so much talent to offer, and we just haven't unlocked that. So building a better world of work is creating that momentum. But how do we do that? And that's, like, I think, a great tie to your book of Valuable Changes. How do we create this momentum? I know on chapter 5, I love the quote from John C. Maxwell: momentum solves 80% of your problems. So if we know that the future of work, building a better world of work, is about momentum, how do we do it? Where do we start?
Yeah. And so, look, when I think about momentum, first of all, momentum's not motivation. And it's useful to draw a delineation there, in that motivation is narrow. Motivation is just one part of momentum. Motivation is all about, well, how do we get someone to do something for us? How do we motivate them to do something for us? And so it's very narrow. Momentum is broader. It's really judging how our teams are, where they are. Where they are. Are they in the depths of despair, or are they at the rooftops shouting glory for what you're trying to change and what you're trying to lead, or are they somewhere in between those? And so when I think about momentum, I think about it in terms of an XY axis. And I've got this tool. It's in the book. It's called the momentum path. So imagine an XY axis, and on the Y axis we have hope, from low to high. On the X axis we have energy, low to high. Now, it's not a straight 45-degree line. It's not as hope increases, energy increases in a 45-degree and in an equal ratio. And this is the common mistake, right? We get caught thinking around, well, how do we motivate people? And if you have a team in the depths of despair, and when I say depths of despair, I'm talking they're literally counting the minutes before they have to finish. They have zero sick leave left because they've used every single minute of it. They have no annual leave. They have no this. They have no interest in being there. They're there because they feel stuck. That is the lowest. That is that group that's low energy, low hope. They're the ones that are not overly productive for us as leaders either. And they're often feisty. They're often cynical. They're often not pleasant to deal with as well, because they're lashing out, right? So if you have a group that's in the depths of despair, using motivation techniques doesn't change a thing for them.
Yeah, I can see somebody who's that cynical, like trying to tell somebody, where we're going, what we're doing. It's just the shrug of the shoulders. I don't care.
That's exactly it.
Like,
it's like they don't
so
care.
passive, going, yeah, it's, in the momentum path, you call it despair. I also think of it as just a highly cynical person, somebody who just, frankly, like I said, just doesn't care.
Yes. And that's because both their hope and energy is so low. And so the trap there is, you don't try to motivate them. Motivation is all about creating energy. And so if the line from hope, between hope and energy, if we're going to draw that on that axis, is not a straight 45-degree line. It leans heavily towards hope first, and then it leans towards energy. And so what the lesson there is, that we as leaders, we need to build hope first. We need to make sure that for anyone that's stuck in a kind of, maybe they're in despair, maybe they're overwhelmed by fear, we need to build that hope to pull them out of that position. And hope, let me quickly define the terms. Hope is a sense of optimism for both what they're doing in terms of the organization, but also their personal place in what they're doing as part of the organization. And energy is closer to how I would describe I've got two young daughters. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Both of them, bundles of energy. And that's the kind of energy that I'm talking about. I'm not expecting our staff members to be climbing over the lounges like my little ones do. But it is still that sense of enthusiasm and that sense of attentiveness and that sense of readiness for whatever needs to be done next. So that idea that they're showing up. And so we need to build that hope first. And so we have this lovely line. It leans towards hope and then heads over to energy. And what I've discovered is that it tends to be 5 stages that a team can be at, or an organization can be at, or an individual can be at, because you can assess this at any level. The lowest level, as I've already mentioned, that's despair. Moving up from that, you then have fearful, you then have hopeful, then motivated, and that's when motivation, once you have people that have that hope, that's when motivation counts. You have motivated, and finally you have fanatic. So there is this stage beyond motivated. We all think about motivation, but there's more than motivation. There are the people. I like to think of people that are obsessed with Apple. Apple are amazing at creating fanatics. The people that camp out overnight to get the newest iPhone. That is a phenomenal level of fanaticism. And you can see that fanaticism because essentially what you're looking at is that it doesn't matter the pain they have to endure. The reward for them and that sense of belonging is so strong that they're going to pursue it anyway. And that's the fanaticism we need to be driving towards as leaders. And that's truly high momentum.
I'm curious that you've been involved in change leadership, change management in your career. Have you seen many organizations been able to master this, to create internal fanatics? So, going down that momentum path, and whether you could say company names or not, but I'm really curious about how have you seen this? How has it been done? Is it just, we're going to create fanatics by giving everyone crazy amount of stock options or unlimited vacation, or that's just kind of those perks, and somebody who's in that pit of despair just goes, okay, I guess I don't need to show up to work because I've got unlimited vacation now. But I'm curious, what have you come across in your journey?
Yeah, so but before I delve into examples, I'll quickly explain what I found the two key mechanisms.
Yeah, that's great.
that help create that fanaticism. And so let's say you've got a team that's motivated. You've got a bunch of high energy, high performers. What I found is the groups that make that next step up, that create that fanaticism. And quite often, just for context here, I don't often see in the change space, I don't often see people camping out overnight. But what you do see is people staying late. What you do see is people talking about it in corridors. And what you end up creating is passive marketing for your change. You create that word of mouth marketing inside your organization for the change that's coming. And that's really that gold standard there, because you've got the email drops and you've got the change champions, you've got all these other techniques, but all of that is I guess, inside out. What you want to achieve is passive word of mouth. And you do that by doing 2 things. First of all, you need to create a sense of belonging. Brené Brown talks about belonging a lot and the personal reward that gives us. But we need to create what we can in terms of the context and the environment to help people have that sense of belonging and to help them see, this is where I fit and I love what I do, and this is me. Create that belonging. The second step there is what I call positive disruption. And that's all about doing something different. And a quick example here, and in fact, this is a real life example. I do a fair bit of work with highly bureaucratic, very hierarchical government organizations. Part of that's because I'm based in Canberra, Australia, and so it is federal HQ here. Mm-hmm. And so there's just a lot of government here, and it makes sense. But what's really interesting is that you can create positive disruption in an environment like that highly hierarchical one, by flattening the decision-making, by making what is typically a 3-week decision-making process, multiple papers, multiple layers of governance all the way up. What we did is we got the exec, and we created an issue destruction meeting. Very, very simple idea. And it was once a week. He came all the way down into the project. The project's team all brought their issue, and there was no filter in terms of is this issue too small or too big, and he sat there and made decisions on the spot, and it was all minuted, bang, 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 bang. And so it flattened what was normally a 3 to 4 week to sometimes 6 week decision-making process into a weekly basis. That created positive disruption. And I mean, in a startup tech environment, you'd go, well, that's crazy. I can't wait a week for my decision.
I couldn't imagine that.
In a government environment, yes. But in a government environment, that was unreal.
Yeah.
That was unheard of. And so that positive disruption rippled through. And so everyone started talking about, oh, these guys are amazing. They get decisions done every single week. And that passive marketing started to flow, and the ripple effect was very much at play. And what was really interesting was that within that change, the momentum picked up. They knew they were going to have decisions. There was that clear vision. They had that sense of belonging. They knew where they fit. And that wasn't the entire story, but it's a very simple example of creating some positive disruption, coupling that with a sense of belonging, and you create this fanatic passive marketing that rolls through.
Yeah, I can see it in your example. I'm picturing myself in that organization, kind of in that despair spot of going, okay, we need a decision. I guess it'll happen in 6 weeks. But, on your axis, you've got hope and energy. And as these change initiatives come into play, yeah, your hope goes up. It's like, oh, there's yes. hope for our organization. There's hope for my team. And my energy goes
yes.
up because I know decisions can be made quicker. So I'm going to put in more effort to show up, to make sure my end of the change or the project is where it needs to be in order to drive that decision forward. So I can definitely see how that happens. I think, yeah, in a tech space or in a startup, decisions happen, sometimes quicker than, you can take a drink of water. And
exactly.
And so, yeah, we're going left, we're going right, we're going up, we're going down, all can happen in one day. And so I think I also like how you've coupled that with your sense of belonging. I think that's not creating a family organization, and that's a whole other topic. It's creating that community, that place where we're having strong communication, where people do have a voice, where people belong, where, we check all of our biases at the door, or we own up to our biases. And I think that has a lot of merit, whether you're going through a change project or just in leadership in general, is creating that sense of belonging, because you can create that hope and get people motivated. But how do you get, your team talking about your business at the pub on Friday?
Exactly.
That is exciting to hear. And
yes. And that's the question. Sorry, but really I think that's the question that as leaders, driving a change or not, that's the question we should be asking ourselves, is how do we get our teams talking about us, ideally in a positive way? How do we get them talking about us at the pub on Friday? That's exactly it. And that will start to get that thinking going. And it's a useful question to ponder, because you're immediately thinking, okay, well, how do we build that community so they feel like they belong? And how do we create that positive disruption? And the positive disruption is so important, because ultimately that's the excuse. That's the thing that gives them something to talk about. If they don't have that positive disruption, there's nothing to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that positive disruption. Let's explore that a little bit more. And because that's not necessarily a term that we throw around in our workplaces on a day-to-day. We talk about motivation, and we've heard momentum, and I love how you're bringing that in. And something that I brought into my team today about creating momentum and what does that mean for each of us. But that positive disruption. So as a leader, we're leading organizations, we're leading teams, we're leading change. Where do we start with positive disruption? Where do we start? How do we create these ripples without just, as I said earlier on, coming into an organization and say, oh, that's great, now you're going to do it my way. Whether that's leading a change, or maybe you're a new leader leading a brand new team and don't know where to start. It's like, okay, your past leader led with their style, and now this is my style. So is that positive disruption or just disruption?
I think it's often the latter, unfortunately.
I think
so. Look, I really like that question. But my advice, in this hypothetical, my advice to that leader would be, hold up. You're striving to build fanatics when you don't even know where people are at yet. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to fall into that mistake of trying to drive even motivation or disruption if they don't feel that sense of hope, if they don't even feel that sense of belonging, that there is that precursor there. So my first advice there would be, let's figure out where you are on the momentum path, where you are and where your team is on that momentum path. And let's get a good sense of that. And let's say they are highly motivated. Let's say you have done a good job and you've built a clear vision. And so they're all feeling motivated. They have those, they're feeling empowered, they're challenged, they're in that lovely motivated stage. Well, then you start to look at, what are some key organizational traits? What are some key organizational pain points? And you essentially just listen. You pay attention for a little while and you watch. And that's why I gave the example of the 6-week decision making, because that was a huge pain point in that organization, and to be honest, most government organizations. And so shortening that, bringing that down, and creating that completely flat structure with no filter on what gets up was hugely disruptive there. And so that's the advice there is, let's look at what's actually painful. And interestingly, the inverse, you mentioned a tech startup, and decisions are being made so fast that you can, before you even have a drink of water or before you blink, right? Decisions are being made left, right, and center. How do you create disruption in an environment like that? Well, perhaps you create a disruption in an environment like that by having that strong driver in the seat and having that really clear vision. Because when decisions are being made that quickly, it can very quickly fall into a sense of chaos. Often positive chaos or coherent chaos, but it's chaos nonetheless. Mm-hmm. And so it's creating perhaps a sense of order in an environment like that. But again, we're just looking at decision making in these two things to illustrate it. But really, what you want to be looking at is, what's the key organizational pain? And then you experiment. Because when you have a team that's already up at that motivation point, you can experiment. They feel safe to fail. You feel safe to fail. You feel safe to reflect and learn. And I talk a lot about learning, and I help a lot of clients about building learning organizations. And we probably won't get time to talk about it today, but perhaps in the future. But you want to build that sense of, it's safe to fail, it's safe to learn. And so then you experiment. And when you're experimenting, you're finding what works. And that's how you create the disruption, through that experimentation.
It's like how you started with, leaders. If you're listening to this and you've been leading a team for many years, or you are new to leadership, or maybe you've been promoted or changed organizations and now you're leading a different team, listen. Ask the good questions and listen and learn. Two qualities of leadership that I don't know if I've seen in any courses or programs. It's, how do we listen? How do we actually listen, turn off our distractions or notifications and actively listen, get into that think I've seen, there's the 4 levels of listening, and that top level is where you're able to tune out everything around you and just focus. So listen, leaders, it's a great skill. I've got 2 small kids too, and I try to listen while I'm reading the news, and listen to them, and then I just jumble up the conversations, and nothing makes sense anymore. But take time to listen and learn. Learning, I think, is just an important aspect of leadership, and creating that momentum. Is learning what works for your new team or your current team. What worked for your past team, if you've been promoted or leading a different team, might not work for this new team. Everyone works a little different. And creating that culture of experimentation where it's okay to fail. I've worked in organizations where I failed and was yelled at. So it's fear, right? You go down that momentum path very quickly from motivated or fanaticism to now I'm fearful. And
yes,
are people afraid in our organization? So if you're a leader listening to this, look around at your team. Are they able to give you great feedback? Do they have permission to experiment? And I'm curious in your example in the government organization, how was that? I can imagine people were a little bit fearful. It's like, okay, this is different. The leader's coming down from on high to come down into our low level office to make decisions. I better put on my best suit and tie because I've got that FaceTime now. I better articulate, I better practice. So was there a bit of that fear, or was it just?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There absolutely was. Initially. Now we were lucky in this situation because the executive, and the thing is, most people are like this though. He was easy to get along with. He was very personable and whatnot, and and so when you're in that kind of position, normally you do have a bit of experience in terms of creating that relation, and so that was nice. That worked well. That was a nice little added benefit, which made that fear dissipate quicker than it otherwise perhaps would have. But despite that, that fear was there. But after a few weeks, a few rounds, the benefits greatly outweighed any potential fear, and people got used to it. We humans are very good at adapting, very, very good at adapting. I mean, anyone that's ever got a pay rise in their life knows how easy it is to just ratchet your life up one step, and then all of a sudden the money just I don't know where it's gone. It's that amazing ability to adapt, and it's the same in this case. And so it's created that positive disruption by doing something different to the organization. And yet it didn't take very long for that inside group to adapt to it. Mm-hmm. And that was highly effective. And to be honest, as a side benefit to this, that executive that came down, he was promoted 6 months later. He moved up even higher because of this initiative. So it was mutually beneficial.
It was beneficial for him personally, for the organization.
That's exactly it.
And I'm sure as a strong leader, as you're describing, wasn't going in there with that selfish intent of, if I do this, I'm going to get a promotion and raise. And so if you're listening to this, it's, maybe there's some selfish intent there. But I've got a previous podcast about imposter leaders. So maybe if that's your intent, go listen to that podcast on imposter leaders. But it starts with that core, and you've got another diagram in the book about core momentum. And so maybe, take us through a few minutes of what does that mean? I know we've kind of touched on that a little bit, and, we talked about, when I look at it as it starts from a leadership perspective to create that core momentum. And so, how would you describe that core? And I know in the diagram, and it's hard to say this on through audio, but you've kind of have a smaller circle of core momentum with kind of the feelers out are called internal influencers. And then there's a dotted line around called community. So walk us through that illustration.
You've described it. Job's done, right?
I took your job there. There you go.
Perfect. Excellent.
I'm going on book tour now.
I'll hire you to write my next book. Look, absolutely. So the core momentum, or rather, that what you're describing there is what I call the valuable people approach. And this is this idea between how do we connect the inside and the outside of our change. And when I say the inside, it's inside out, realm of control, and then the broader stakeholder groups all the way through to clients and customers and whatnot. And so the diagram there is rather simple. There is that internal circle which has that core momentum, and you need to get that effective. I mean, you as a minimum, you need to be hopeful, motivated, or fanatic in there. You need to get that hope built, and you need to get that fear managed and out of there as best you can. Then you put your you essentially then put your feelers out. And I am conscious of time, and this is a whole nother discussion in terms of, well, how do we then find the right people to target? But I'll do it in 30 seconds if I can. That the end notes, the summary notes to this is that our organizations follow the same network patterns as do every human-made network. And that the pattern is one of hubs and nodes, in that there is these people that are connectors within your organization. They're the ones that essentially are the glue for your organizations. A nice way to think about this is if you think of the internet. Now, how do you find any website on the internet? You go through either Google, Facebook, Amazon, one of these big connectors. I should probably mention Bing. I'm sure people use it. No, but you use one of these connectors. I mean, if you look at that hub to node ratio, I mean, Google has trillions of connections and it increases every day. Amazon has millions or hundreds of millions. Facebook hundreds of millions as well. And so you go to one of these hubs, and then you go to where you need to be. And that same pattern exists in our organizations. I mean, it's not a 1,000,000,000,000 ratio, but there are these people that are those key connectors within our organization. And the art is finding those people and enlisting them to your cause, and ultimately then building a community around them. Mm-hmm. And so those people are what I call the internal influencers. You then wrap them up, put your arms around them, and create that community, and use them, I guess, as those little watch posts throughout your organization, because they are most of us, know this idea of change champions. Mm-hmm. Right? If you manage to find these internal influencers, they are the most efficient change champions in your entire organization, because they're the people that people go to. Yeah. They're the people that people look up to. So you get them on board, you've essentially brought an entire group with them. Now, the art is, how do we find them? And again, I'll give you the summary notes here. It's just 2 questions. You run a quick survey, and you ask 2 questions across your organization. The first is, if you could work on any project with any 3 people, who would you work with? And you get 3 names from everyone. You then ask, who do you go to for organizational updates, news, and gossip? And you get 1 name. You then just count the names. And the more often a name comes up, the more likely that they are an internal influencer. And it gives you this lovely map. And I mean, those that are data inclined may well slice and dice that many other ways. And there are some really interesting lenses there in terms of, maybe who's got the most connection outside of their own department and things like that. But generally, it gives you the list of those who are wielding that greater connective power. And so they're the people that you target.
When you were saying that, a name popped in my mind from a couple of organizations ago, rather large organization, but there was somebody on my team who was kind of the go-to person for a lot, for advice, for gossip, for, if they want to just bad talk the organization, a big influence in the organization. And we were going through a big software change, implementing an ERP and CRM system, and it was messy. And I remember sitting down with my leader and saying, we need to get this person on board and a champion, because if we get this person as a champion, everybody else will follow. And we worked hard and to get that person to be a champion. And they were heading up a lot of the testing and training, and they were that big influence in the organization. And, whether you're going through a big a big change or not, I think even in our team meetings and our scrums or stand-ups or weekly meetings, we feel the energy, whether it's through, we're doing this over video and I feel your energy. So there's that sense of energy that you get either through a direct connection or an indirect connection. And then it's opportunity to start exploring that. And for lack of a better word, is exploiting that, to build that community, to build that those fanatics within our organization. That's great. It's a great illustration, and it's simple. And I think if any leaders listening to this right now, if you can vision that, awesome. If not, even better, go pick up the book and take a look. So, yeah, as we wrap up, Brendon, and I wish we could go on for a couple hours here because there's so many different topics we could hit on just out of this podcast. But somebody who's listening to this, whether you're a leader, aspiring leader, leading a big project, is there one piece of advice or one piece of wisdom to start with to create that momentum?
Yeah, so it's funny. I had something in mind there, but I'm actually going to drop it. And I think out of this conversation, it's listen. It's take that moment and listen. Don't try to motivate too early. Don't try to create disruption too early. Don't immediately jump. The amount of times that I go in with a client and I draw that momentum path on a board and I say, where are you and your teams? And they always place themselves up at motivated or higher. And then once we delve in, it's often lower. And it's just this intuitive, we're doing great. So my advice there is take a moment, listen, get an accurate bearing, and then move forward from there.
That's wonderful. And yeah, if you're going about your day to day or just starting your day or ending your day, it's important to listen. Not listen to your own voice, but listen to other people's. And often we love to hear ourselves talk and we give ourselves pats on the back all the time and listening to our own voice, but listen to our teams. Where are they? And that's great advice, and it's a great place to start. Brendon, I hate to cut it there, but we're definitely going to have you back. Another topic that you hit on is learning organizations and how to create that. I think that fits in with the theme here at People Managing People and Build a Better World of Work. Creating a learning organization just is something that we have to do. And so maybe we'll table that for another conversation and get into the why, and not just the why, but the how. But such a pleasure to have you on. And thanks again for spending some time with us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on again. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yes, and for those who are listening, if you've enjoyed this conversation, please share it out with your network. And we're going to be posting the links in the show notes as well as on our social media when we publish the podcast, so you can learn more about Brendon, what he's up to, his website as well as his book. So please go pick it up. And as always, please check us out on social media and subscribe and leave some comments. And we always love to hear your feedback. So with that, Brendon, have a great day. And to those who are listening, I hope you have a phenomenal day as well. Take care.